Thank you so much for tuning in to Circling Dialogos. If you are inspired by what we talk about on this channel and want to dive deeper and in fellowship with others, there's a number of ways you can do that. One is to become my client and work one-on-one with me. We also have circling events every week open to the public. We also do weekend intensives for circling every 4 to 6 weeks or so. And we have a year-long Art of Circling practitioner training program. We also have self-study programs that you can do at your own pace. All the relevant links, including my email, is below in the show notes. Please let me know if you have any questions. I am so happy to be speaking with you. It's been a long time coming. You know, it's interesting because we've had a lot of, changes in schedules, and I messed up one time on my schedule, and, then the Comcast went down. And so our conversation further and further into the future. And in the meantime, right, just having that, in some sense, I've been having, through reading one of your most recent books, I've been having a conversation with you for about 3-4 months. I've been in some kind of dialogue with you. And we actually last week, we met for this video right now, and then Comcast took your internet down, and then it was been another week. So I've been talking with you all week.
Well, actually, I'm glad too that the few delays we've had has given you a chance to read this latest book, and it's a book that's more personal as well. So I can understand what you're saying. We've been, in a way, dialoguing with each other in many ways, apart from this conversation. So
yeah. Absolutely, because I think one of the things, because I've always kind of been, in a certain sense, in a question about my relationship with philosophy. I've been reading Heidegger since, on my own, since I was in my early 20s, and it's a surprise to me, as anyone else, given my dyslexia and my learning disabilities and all that kind of stuff. I got really struck by something in Heidegger. And in some sense, it's been a bit of a mystery to me. Now I'm deep in philosophy, and I have friends who are philosophers, and I have ongoing philosophical conversations. But it never occurred to me. I've never felt like myself as a philosopher, right? But it's interesting because I've been diving a little bit more recently into some of the Christian mystics, and especially Eckhart, and this notion of Christian contemplation. And I'm starting to realize that's actually more of my relationship with philosophy, is this contemplative, meditative wondering, right, about what's most near to me, what's most close. And I think the thing that's probably closest to us and strangely obscure at the same time is being. And I get this sense that there's a similar tonos in your work, like reading Eckhart and kind of the place it puts me, and then reading your work, and especially the latest work, which remind me the title of it.
In Heidegger's Vineyard, Reflections and Mystical Vignettes.
Yeah. It's a very similar thing. So I sense that there's a very there's something that you draw out, right, that's really deep in Heidegger, which for me brings me into this, whatever it is that we mean by contemplative
Right.
sense of.
And I think, what you're saying is very important, I think, because we've come to think of philosophy in such a narrow sense.
Yeah.
And it's probably only the last 100 years or so where we have come to define philosophy with strict analytical thinking or logical thinking. Um, and yet, if we look to the history of Western philosophy, at least, I mean, this meditative or contemplative component has always been part of philosophical thinking,
Yeah.
but it's fallen away. And I think one of the reasons I became attracted to Heidegger's thinking early on was that I sensed, I didn't have a full understanding of what was so attractive or compelling to me, but I had a sense that Heidegger was trying to restore to us a deeper kind of thinking, a more meditative and contemplative way of thinking, a richer thinking that could address all of these really core questions that we have as human beings and that you're talking about.
Yeah. One of the, one of the things I really wanted to talk with you today about, right? I would love to do, if possible, like maybe do a video on each one of your books and kind of dive deep on each one. But I wanted to really get to know you and particularly how that all opened up for you, right? And what was going on with Heidegger, right? And your life and what like kind of what opened this up to you. And then one of the cool things, like amazing things that's been going on, I know for you personally in your life is your new grandfather.
That's right. Yeah. And interestingly enough, I think I first began thinking about Carl Jung's work when I was in college, and his version of depth psychology intrigued me very much. I thought it was more appealing, more profound than Freud's account, although, I did my fair share of study of Freud and psychoanalysis. But there was something very uh, powerful about Jung's understanding of the collective unconscious, or the archetypes in particular. And this notion he has of the individuation process, that there's a telos, that somehow we human beings are not just aimlessly wandering through life. It's not just about accidents and contingency altogether, but that there is some center or some core that is not conscious, but that is unfolding us. And in a way, we're trying to keep up with that unfolding process consciously. We're trying to integrate it in our own way. So all of that thinking was very attractive, but it was very much against the grain, right? Because in 20th century thinking, in 20th century philosophy, continental philosophy, and certainly in analytic philosophy, I mean, there's no longer any notion of a telos, right? There's no core center to human beings that unfolds us. That kind of thinking is so incompatible with so much of modern and especially contemporary thinking. So it was always there, but the demands of a young scholar bring you in all sorts of different directions. So it's over time that all became
Mm,
clearer to me, or
mm,
I could appreciate it more, or I could find evidence of that in my own life. And so we were talking about becoming a grandfather, my wife, a grandmother for the first time. And it does remind me of, those Jungian archetypes of becoming or beginning to unfold that archetype of the wiser older man and the wiser older woman,
Yeah.
and what those characteristics are and how that's different from being a father or a mother, which are archetypes in their own way.
Yeah.
So yes, I've been thinking about that quite a bit, and I think some of those qualities we talked about last time. There's wisdom, primarily the wisdom of experience that you bring to being a grandparent, a certain degree of calmness and serenity that you don't have as a parent.
Yeah.
Also, a measure of detachment, but in a good way, detachment uh, that you can see your grandchild uh, in a way that can be more helpful in some ways that a parent cannot be or cannot provide that kind of perspective.
Yeah, totally.
So, yeah, so we very much feel that we're unfolding yet another dimension of ourselves. And if we were to use the Jungian framework, it's an unfolding of another archetype.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. As I'm listening to you, I'm getting this sense of this, of course, this is very, very much Heidegger goes to great length to articulate this sense in which you kind of come to or find yourself in a pattern or an archetype, right? This sense of this strange sense where, normally we think of it as our kind of humanistic, secular Cartesian egos that we're outside and we step into things and we step into relationships. But if that's never our experience, it's like all of a sudden here you are, you're finding yourself looking at your grandchild and you're noticing a particular way that you're seeing things that was different than the
Exactly.
and that there's this thing that you've been already taken up in and you kind of find. And I also heard that in what you said about kind of the meandering way that you've come to Heidegger and come to your reflections through Jung, that in some way you've undergone them, but it's not like you've understood them the whole time, but you look back and your past keeps becoming more apparent to you, like, which is a strange thing to think about because you think like, well, I already went through it, I should know everything about it. But
That's
then
right.
yourself going, oh, like the story of your past reveals itself to you in this way that you're in a pattern that you somehow are, but yet you find yourself already in the midst of.
Yes, and I think that's one of the things that also attracted me to Heidegger too. Then was that both he and Jung have this sense of the unfolding
Yeah.
of things and the unfolding of ourselves, and that was missing in some of the early, Western philosophical thinking that became so fixated on essences and these timeless forms that are thought to be, excuse me, at the heart of things. So this sense of unfolding, temporal unfolding, is there in both Jung and Heidegger, and that attracted me a great deal because I think that you're absolutely right. Yeah, we're not there all at once ever. It, it
Yeah.
it takes time and patience and a kind of safeguarding and safekeeping of the unfolding process that we are. And that's our contribution to it. We can help it along by becoming aware of it, by being patient with it, by safeguarding it, safekeeping it, and allowing it to happen.
Hmm.
And that's that's our contribution. But clearly something is happening to us without us. I mean, that is without our conscious ego demands or
Yeah.
decisions and actions and
Yeah.
insistences.
I hope you're enjoying this video so far. Just wanted to remind you, if you are interested in diving deeper in what we talk about here on the channel, in fellowship and in a more embodied way, there are a number of relevant links in the show notes, including working with me one-on-one as a client. All the information is below, including my email address. It's funny, I was really hearing your hands as you're describing this kind of unfolding and safeguarding. You're doing this, right? And about the ego, started doing didn't, 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 didn't. And this is such an interesting way of, I think, says so much, right? I hear in this something like something more like midwifing, like this, I guess, and it's hearkening to what Heidegger's reflections on kind of Gelassenheit and this different notion of action from a different kind of will of some kind.
Yes, it is a giving birth. I mean, I think that we are all giving birth to ourselves. And a lot, what I think matters is how we address that. And it's much more difficult today. I think, and I don't want to be nostalgic, and I'm not suggesting there was a golden age or anything like that, but we seem in the cultural context of the present, in the present age, to be so oblivious to this reality of our giving birth to ourselves and helping others give birth to themselves, that we're so locked into this immediacy of the technological age, of an age of efficiency and productivity, or of scientific materialism, that we've just completely overlooking this. I mean, you raised a great point last time. You were talking about your mom and in something comparable to the villages down in Florida.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I don't mean to disparage these communities at all, because we have friends who live in such communities, but in a time when um, when these archetypes emerge for us as human beings, if they're entirely frustrated by the external world, if there's no place or room or space for us to unfold in this way, what happens is, as you mentioned, there is frustration and a kind of reversion to previous forms of being. Uh, a kind of reversion in this case to teenage behavior, or
Yeah.
being a very uh, trying to retrieve and repeat
Yes.
an earlier stage of life. But
Yes.
that's largely because the world is not giving us the opportunity. The cultural context is not giving us that opportunity to unfold in these ways that we do as human beings. And it's I've witnessed the same thing. I've seen the same thing. And we'll have to see how this all plays out, because clearly, too, one wonders, young people are either not getting married or choosing not to have families, and that's perfectly up to them. But if they are having children later and later, I mean, this also prevents or does not permit there to be the experience of the grandparent,
Yeah.
because you know not too many grandparents are going to be playing baseball or doing the kinds of things on the playground when they're in their 90s, if they make it into their 90s. And so it's another frustration of the unfolding process. We have to see how that all plays out. It's not clear yet.
Yeah, I like the way that you're saying that. It really captures it. The frustration of the unfolding process,
Yeah,
right?
right,
Archetype,
right.
an archetypal pattern doesn't have a place and it gets frustrated, right? There's
Right,
seems
right.
like it regresses, right? In some
Yes.
and it's interesting. There's like direct evidence of that in Florida, and some of the counties in Florida are the highest concentration of venereal disease of anywhere in the world. But and what's interesting to that when because and here's the thing about this is like you qualified, you have friends and stuff that have retired in those communities, and it makes sense. It makes sense for my mom to retire there. It makes sense for my aunt and uncle to move there. It's just a very sensible and the best possible thing for them. But that is the case, right, is really strange. Um,
Right.
because there's this kind of way where more like in a I guess a more the the way life laid itself out further in history is you had grandparents, and grandparents, right, were in some sense like the pattern or the site of wisdom. And and then but the way things were set up is such that the younger people had a certain expectation and demand of that be the case for them, right? So there was this reciprocal need going on, right? In a
Right.
big
Right.
and it's just interesting to me that now um, the old people in some strange way it's almost upside down, because it's like the old people, if you have grandparents like and try to connect with them on Zoom, they're like it's a kind of a classic joke of like, my parents don't know how to connect on Zoom, and I have to like walk them through because it's a ability that in some sense, right, a lot of the children actually find their parents in our time through technology to be children, right? And there's a certain frustration that I hear in a lot of, because I'm in um I come across a lot of people who share with me like kind of their own personal lives at a very enriched detail. And I hear that a lot of to now the relationship with children to their parents is one of like, they feel as if they're frustrated because they feel as if they have now a dependent that they have to take care of. And they don't look to them nor expect of them wisdom, which is such a strange thing. It's like almost like things are really, really upside down. And
Yeah. No, I think you're right. In some fundamental way, we've infantilized older people, and 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 it's a shame, uh, because I think most people who are older or who have grandchildren really want to uh, fulfill that role in the way that it has been, uh, well, not only laid out traditionally, but laid out in our psyches. I think we have just a natural, teleological inclination to play out this later part of life in a certain way. And when that's blocked completely, or to a great extent, um, what else could it lead to but frustration and maybe anger or bitterness, loneliness? But or the other side of it is the reaction, well, the hell with it. I'm just going to be 18 again. I'm just going to play out my youth.
Yeah.
And and I fear, and again, I don't want to be judgmental at all, because I have great sympathy for all people trying to struggle in life, but you can't help but observe that there's a certain ridiculousness to the way some older people are now behaving, especially in these communities. And it's a shame, it's a shame that they've been reduced to a kind of sideshow in many cases.
Yeah, totally. It's striking to watch that, just to find ourselves in that situation. Um,
Right.
and and I can't help but to think that, and I sense in your work is that there's something about this, is think about wisdom, the embodiment of wisdom, right? Like, because one of the things you said last time is, and you alluded to it here, is like being a grandfather, you're noticing like that it's a very different position to be a grandfather than it is to be a father, right?
Yes.
And one way of
Yes.
like breaking that down is going, well, situationally, you don't have the day-to-day needs at every moment in the survival, right, of the immersive facticity that it is to be parents, right? Like we all know that one.
Right.
There's like a circumstantial way of saying that, but then there's also, I would imagine that, like, just by the fact that you have gone through life and you've raised kids, that there's a looking that can in some sense, like, I think this is kind of maybe what wisdom maybe means, is to be able to see deeper into the facticity, into what is most significant, right? And when you see
Right.
most significant, right, there are other things that like look at the surface like alarming and significant, but actually you can see through it and realize, like, actually that's not that important. The real important thing is there. And I got that sense of that, and having had a grandfather and been fortunate enough to like being like spent a lot of time, he practically raised me in a lot of respects.
Mm.
That gaze of that wisdom of seeing through the facticity into the deeper level of significance in just his way of being and his way of responding to me, I think really had a big influence on kind of holding open the mystery for me that has been so permanent in my, like, true in my life, right? That almost my whole life and everything I love about my life is a function of, is that openness.
Yes, that's beautifully said, because I think that grandparents can initiate young people into their own lives in a very different way from a parent,
Yeah.
and it's a wonderful event. It's a wonderful blessing to be able to have that kind of relationship. Um, but again, uh, I think that these relationships are at the very least under pressure
Yeah.
today, if if they are not disappearing altogether for a variety of different reasons, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
the cycle of life has most definitely been disrupted, and um, maybe it will continue to be disrupted. You can't predict the future, but there is something to the cycle of life, and that has to be respected connected in some way. We just can't run counter completely to the innate cycle of life that all of us are subject to.
Yeah, yeah. And this is this this technological, you think about cycle. What I hear in that is to undergo a cycle. Like it's, in the way you talk about Jung and this kind of circumambulating, he's difficult to read, right? Like precisely because what he's doing in his writing is like circumambulating around something, finding like the pattern that unfolds, that he goes around and around something, right? Um, and
And he says it's the ego trying to connect with what he calls the self, and the self is that centering um, a point within us that is unfolding us in a certain way, and the ego, you know, at some point in our lives is completely unaware of the work of the self, the center. There's something like this in the later Heidegger as well, because the later Heidegger, not so much the early Heidegger, and I talk about that in my books.
yeah,
There's a great difference between the early Heidegger and the later Heidegger. But in the later Heidegger, he too talks about, our being called to wholeness, and Jung says, we're called to a completeness, not perfection, but completeness. And once the ego can become aware of that, it can in some way work together with what he calls the self to bring that to fruition. But if the ego remains completely cut off from
yeah,
that deeper self, then there are all the frustrations and anxieties and that we see around us today. I mean, I think that it's just to live only out of the ego is to be constantly frustrated
yeah,
and constantly uh, dissatisfied, and
yeah,
so
yeah. And and yeah, hungry for it's like in some sense, technology is this really almost this pure form of idolatry in a certain sense, right? This continually hungry for things that will just make me more unsatisfied but hungry for more, right? And that whole enframing thing. And you know, this is one of the things I sense in your work, right? You've made it a real point, and I want to speak to, and I'm wondering if what we're addressing right now is actually what's at stake in the matter, in the way that how I read a lot of your work is you've really been called to remind and see within Heidegger the matter of his thought really the whole time, and that there seems to be a lot of people that kind of take the notion of like his central notion of the mystery of being, right? Like that he was constantly perplexed by, consumed by, right?
right, right,
In an ongoing perplexing relationship with, that there's a lot of people that kind of push that aside and in some sense appropriate his work, right, for kind of like the meaning making process, or like this kind of alternate way of explaining, facticity and death and all of these kinds of things. And I get in the sense that everything, like most of your work really goes, let's not forget,
right,
right? Let's not forget
right,
what he already had in view when he wrote in Being and Time, right?
right.
And I sense in that you being awake to something really being at stake in the matter with that, something super important. And I'm wondering about what that is that you sense. Like what's at stake in remembering that? What's at stake in forgetting that in Heidegger?
You know, I think that I've always had this abiding sense that there is something um, far deeper in our existence than what Heidegger would call the ontic. You know, I mean, all of the ontic activities. In fact, in the last chapter in the book, I point out that I'm not disparaging the ontic, you know, the everyday activities that we have to engage in. There's something quite beautiful and satisfying about that, also sometimes frustrating. Uh, but it's not a matter of turning our back on the ontic, but it's rather recovering the ontological, recovering that deeper part of ourselves, that deeper space in ourselves where we can dwell with some the tranquility or serenity uh, uh, and uh, and enjoy, I think, this um, deeper relation to things, to others, to being itself, or name this what you will. But I think that is what has always struck me as rather problematical in our contemporary culture. And I had a sense of that from the very beginning. And so, in a way, you know, as you frame it, Guy, in an interesting way, I've always felt a need to share that with others, you know, to talk about that with others, um, to in a way awaken that in others, but not as a crusade, but just as a reminder, as you say, here it is. You know, let's not overlook it. Let's see, you know, what that looks like and how we can dwell in that way and what that would mean for us as human beings. So yes, and it's for that reason that my work, um, I've tried to, you know, Heidegger used to say that, you know, his thinking was guided by the North Star. You know, it was fixed in the sky. This is what he wanted to say, and I felt the same way. You know, I don't want to talk about all the other ancillary issues around Heidegger. I don't like, you know, I mean, I leave it to others if they want to talk about the cultural, the social, the political, the economic, and there's all sorts of applications that you can make with Heidegger, and that's all great and wonderful. But no, that's not the issue that has fascinated me or that has captured me and that I want to talk about with other people.
Yes. You know, one of the things, it's a couple of things. As you talk about that, I found myself kind of drawn into the very thing that you're talking about. And I can, the animation on your face that shows up communicates so much of uh, this way that this this way that it kind of, I get the sense that like in some sense it's calling you, right? Like I
Right.
like at the bottom of it, you probably couldn't come up with any propositions as to like why or even what the call is exactly, but you find yourself already drawn into this this horizon, if you will, or this beyond the horizon.
Right. Right. Yes. Yes. And I try to speak from that space. It's a different space from the space that we normally talk to each other uh, about things. And there's a place for that other space, that ontic space. You know, we have to we have to do business in the world, and we have to order food, and we have to go to the supermarket. Yeah, but there is another space in which we exist, in which we dwell, and what I'm trying to do, what I think Heidegger was trying to do, is to speak to people from that space as well. And there, maybe, we need another language, or we need a poetic language, or we need a mythic language, or simply we need to communicate or convey from that space as well. And that's what I'm trying to do. That's why I framed it. It hit me one day. I said, um, I think of my work as inviting others to take a walk with me, a meditative walk. That struck me, that image struck me so much that I said, I'm going to write this book and I'm going to call it In Heidegger's Vineyard, where we can walk and gather these fruitful notions from a deeper place, from a deeper place.
Yeah.
And I want others to come along with me on that walk. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
We're gonna walk together and talk together, as we're doing right now.
Yeah. Totally. As you say, speak from that place.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
From that place.
And that needs
Yeah.
that calls forth a different kind of language, or it calls forth a different rhythm, a different tone, a different sensibility, a different affect from what we normally uh, experience in our ontic lives.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it what's striking me is just the word walking, right? And in the vineyard. And what is it about that just is so speaks the matter? I think about, like, if I were to make a guess, there's something about when you go for a walk. It's a particular place where there's kind of, you know, already in walking, you are not going anywhere, right? Like you're going somewhere, but you're not going anywhere, right? There's a particular relationship with when you go for a walk. It's a different kind, it seems like a different relationship with time in some sense. I'm thinking about
Yes.
Follet, right? It, in how Aristotle and Socrates talked about they want to spend all their time in schole, which my understanding of schole is it's a way, talking about it temporally, it's a way of holding time, that time in terms holds you back, right? This kind of this place where what emerges is a implicit sufficiency, right? Or a moreness or a surplus of, in a way that time kind of holds you in the way that you hold it. And there's something about walking, right, in a vineyard that seems to be speaks to that deep sense in such a in such a meaningful way to me.
That's great, and I think that's what I was trying to convey. I also think too, when I am teaching or when I'm lecturing, I want to convey that as well, in my presence, uh, uh, because so often, uh, as academic presentations can can I read a poem? Can I read a poem by Walt Whitman
Yeah,
that I think
I'd love
that
it.
that that I think captures this in a way? So one of my favorite poems. I grew up on Long Island, only 10 minutes from where Walt Whitman was born.
Oh, you did?
And yeah, yeah. So since I was a kid, I was always enchanted by Walt Whitman's poetry.
Yeah.
And um, and Whitman has a presence in all of my Heidegger work in
Yeah.
one way or another.
Yes.
So one of the poems that I always loved was titled "When I Heard the Learned Astronomer." It's a short poem, but I just love to read it. So the poem goes, when I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon, unaccountable, I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. And it's such a beautiful way of saying, to me, in one way, there's so many meanings and resonances, but I try not to be that professor of astronomy in the lecture hall, droning on, simply providing data, simply putting up the PowerPoint, simply communicating information. There's some deeper hunger that I think students and in fact all, at least in my view, that all are looking for when I get up there to talk. And I'm drawing on those last three lines, till rising and gliding out. I mean, that's what a spirit does, right? I mean, we don't generally say we rise and glide out of a room, but the spirit rises and glides out of that room. And, as Whitman says here, in that mystical moist night air, perfect silence, looked up at the stars. And so that's the space that I also want to speak from.
Yeah.
That's the space I want to speak from as well.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. There's something, yes, there's the from, the speak from. And I also heard in that um a listening that you have in that speaking from. There's already a listening of who's before you, right? Like in some sense a hunger for this that maybe I would imagine maybe not even the students would be able to articulate, right? Or even
That's right.
tell you about, but a hearing and that speaking from, a listening that you're speaking into, that in some sense I kind of get this feeling invites that very sense of finding ourselves in an archetype, finding ourselves
That's
already
right.
done, underway in the matter in some deep way.
Exactly. And that's what I sensed in reading Heidegger, that he's moving us, his language, the way he talks about things, he's moving us into a different space, that deeper space.
Yeah.
And um, and I responded to that very well, because I too feel that it's possible to awaken that in others, in the way that we talk to one another, and in the way that, as a professor, I'm talking with students or with an audience, and not just professing to them, which we hear all too often. Just, we hear enough of professing, people just telling us what they think and how to think, and what the data is, what the empirical evidence is. But it's another thing to bring others, to bring ourselves into that deeper space, which we could breathe more freely, uh, in which we can flourish in a way that we simply can't in the average everyday ontic world.
Yes. You, in your description of them, you use the word try to awaken, right? And it's interesting. I hear already in that word awakening, right? Presupposes that which is already present, right? But maybe asleep, right? To
Right.
in that sense of that seems to be really important about this. Like that what you're awakening is actually already there in some deep sense, right? And to awaken it, right, is to unconceive. Like now we're talking about, now we're getting the word aletheia, right?
Yes. Right. Right. It is there. There is that deeper dimension. There is that deeper level.
Yeah.
And uh, at least as I see it, it's certainly there, but more and more it seems difficult to access, and especially for younger people. Um, you know, at colleges and universities, when I visit, I mean, I just see young people so burdened, so beleaguered, really, by the bombardment of
Yeah.
data, by empirical studies, by demands, and all sorts of obligations, oughts, musts, shoulds. that that deeper space is there, but they can't get access to it because there aren't many opportunities to get access to it
Yeah.
any longer,
Yeah.
you know?
It's almost like I got this picture in some sense of, yeah, not many can hear the silence in them or respond to
Exactly, exactly. When I grew up as in the Roman Catholic faith, I mean, my parents were Italian
them.
immigrants, and I grew up in Roman Catholic Church, but I can recall, um, I guess in um, maybe the first 10 or 12 years, there was still a Latin Mass. And I recall the Latin Mass, the Latin, I didn't understand Latin, but there was the space of mystery. There
Yeah.
was a space of mystery, of quiet, of contemplation, of meditation. And um, so that's just one example from my own experience that I think is missing today because, I mean, even in religion, I hear students say, well, it's just more of the same everyday average, you know, pitter patter, chit chat. You must do this. You should do this. There's no space for the mystery anymore anywhere, even ironically enough, in religion.
Yeah.
And so where can they get access to that space in
Right.
themselves that is connected to something beautiful and something wonderfully mysterious?
Yeah. So being a professor, like, is really what I'm hearing is in some sense is like it, I would imagine is, this is, this is very deep, like this sense of Heidegger of listen, right? This relationship with listening, right? And silent and its connection with silence. I really hear that, and in some sense, yeah, you're not professing out to them. And then more and more, it seems like education seems to be that there's the person up there that's has information, right? And your job as a school,
That's right.
right, is to get the information over here, right? Like,
Right,
but I
right,
what
right.
you're talking about is much more not about being informed, but evoking something that is by means in which we can not just know, but understand in the deepest sense.
That's it exactly, Guy. And when I teach Plato, that's how I teach Plato. When I
Yeah.
teach Aristotle, that's what I'm not interested in, giving them 12 positions to write down on the chalkboard or the PowerPoint so that they can. But what is it in Plato that draws us deeper into that space? What is it in Aristotle? What is it in Emerson? I love teaching Emerson. What is it in the great philosophers that they saw this as well in their own way, and how can we uh, uh, gain access to that today?
Mm,
But it's not about professing positions. No, not for me. Not for me.
totally. Yeah. And you had mentioned in your books, and you talked with quite a bit of reverence about um, someone you called your friend and your mentor. Um, is it what's his is it William Rich
Bill Richardson. Bill Richardson.
Bill Richardson? And for people who don't or are not familiar with him, he wasn't Bill the one that basically like spoke the difference and the similarities and the connection between the early Heidegger and this turn that happens, right? Because
Right.
Heidegger
Hmm.
didn't really do much like self biography and tracking of his own development. Like he kind of left that to
That's
other,
right.
and and the
Yes.
first one to really cite that and notice this turn. And you used one of the things that struck me about that is you didn't refer to him as your teacher. You referred to him as a mentor and a friend. And there's something about mentorship that I think strikes me as something that feels rare and rarer. But it sounds like it's very connected to the way that you approach your teaching, right? That there's something about a mentorship, right? There's something different going on there. And I was wondering about like, can you share a little bit about like what was it like having him as a mentor? Like, what does that mean for you?
Well, as I think about it now, I think the key to mentoring is, well, first of all, you know, he awakened something in me. And I was very grateful to him for that because there was a certain power and compelling quality to his presence too that I was attracted to, and the way he would talk about Heidegger, and so I was very attracted to that, and he certainly was a guide for me working through Heidegger's texts, and helped me put some of the pieces together. But I think the key thing to mentoring is at some point you have to free that person to be who they are, you
Yeah.
know. And I've known too many people who, you know, insist that the one who's studying with them, or the one who's being mentored, adhere in every single way to what the mentor is saying
Kind of like
or
what Freud did with Jung.
yeah, right. And Freud was unwilling to let Jung be who he needed to be, and it had to come to a pretty nasty ending.
Hmm.
Um, but Richardson, at some point, uh, we had our differences on certain things, not personal differences at all, but in terms of reading Heidegger. But he was wonderful. He just let me be. He freed me, and he said, "Now you have to, follow your path in reading Heidegger."
Hmm.
And I'm very grateful to him for that because I've known too many other people who uh, the mentor can't handle that, can't accept that, and they turn angry or bitter, and it gets very ugly, just as you said it did with Freud and Jung. But that didn't happen. No, Bill said, go, you know,
Yeah.
do as you must here. And
Yeah.
I've tried to do that too with students who have found my Heidegger work to be compelling, or attractive to them. I'm always open to conversation and discussion, but no ties, there's no you know, set of conditions that only if you agree entirely
Yeah.
with what I have to say can I support you. No, no, they have to be free to
So,
gather on their.
so it sounds like just in that beholding you and letting you, right? So you said something about there's something gravitational that drew you to him. There was a certain something there for you, like that drew you in,
Yes,
right? And
yes,
it sounds like he, in some sense, welcomed that, right? But in his mentoring, at some point, maybe there's a difference or a different path that you were going, and he didn't bite down, but
right, right,
you get the sense he modeled something in that moment, right? That let you be, right? This is one of the things about this I think this is why mentorship is really got my attention. Like my grandfather was he moved to he was born in Hanover, Germany in I don't remember what year, but into a farmer family. So he had like 17 brothers and sisters, and he was destined to be, a farmer. That's why they had kids, so they could help, like raise
that's right.
farm. And he had like a radical spirit, and so he escaped, right, which is something you could do if you have 17 brothers and sisters, and went and mentored with a tailor for 2 years in Hanover, Germany, and then came to the United States and started. His last name was Hofmeister, Hof Cleaners, as a tailor. And one of the things that my grandfather like did a lot of with me is he had the most amazing stories. And in some ways, I think he really taught me how to listen, right? And what
Hmm.
listening was. Dude, he had so many stories. And I remember him the way that he would talk about his time with the tailor that he was apprenticing with. There was this kind of way that I got this sense that being his apprentice involved sometimes talking about what to do and how to do the work of
Right,
tailoring, but also
exactly.
that there's a different kind of dwelling that you're inside of as you're talking about and pointing things out, like ontically, if you will, right, about tailoring. But there's something that you're both dwelling in together, right? That is more than just the instructions, more than just the information, more than just the craft, but how to be such that the craft could come into being, and that happens in this kind of mutual dwelling in some way, that that I sense is so it's like that deep relationality that is always in some sense in the background, right?
Right.
It's like
Right.
in my, I train people to do like the thing I do. And I've always got that sense that, like all the stuff we talk about on one level is really important, but really the real teacher is this, this very difficult thing to put into words. This thing that's like we're dwelling in the background is really the thing that's doing the teaching.
That's really well observed. I agree with you there, and I think it fleshes out, what I'm trying to say too about Bill was that it was in the background, but I had a sense that he was speaking to me and to others from that deeper place,
Hmm.
and that I could count on him to understand that deeper place that I wanted to speak from as well. Because I had many good teachers, but there was something that what you're pointing out, that certain sensibility or that certain depth or that certain um, you know, what you can't even name in a way
You're
that I sensed from the very beginning, and that formed the basis of that relationship, even as you say, when we're dealing with specific things like, like the tailor has to know how to sew properly. And so a scholar needs to know how to make references properly and, use the text properly. And so all that comes into play. But within the context, within that framework of something far more deep and unsaid.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes. It's so strange because I can feel it's like it urges you to try to speak it, but it withdraws in the very attempt of speaking it. It's not just it somehow whatever that is like likes our attempts, right? So almost so that
Right.
it can show itself by withdrawing, right? Shines forth and withdraws time. That set, it's funny as you're talking about this, I'm getting this so interesting. I wasn't it that this where this our dialogue is really taking us in this like in your that because I think in some way this is what I really got with continually get with Heidegger is how much of his whatever 133 volumes of work, and I guess there's so much that hasn't been published yet still, right? How much he didn't say, right? Like so it in in his path of thinking, right? There's always this sense where he's pointing to something. Like a really good example of that is that um his conversation with the Japanese philosopher, right? In that dialogue, they spend that's almost an entire dialogue, right? Being in caution about the thing that they should or shouldn't say. And like, and there's this kind of way where like the caution about the matter in which they were speaking, like there was this hesitation and this what is the right attitude and what is the danger in trying to in the whole dialogue is walking around, right? And I don't think I don't think it's obvious whether or not they said it or not by the end. And I think that in some sense is saying it. This 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 thing that's like this that in some sense it's that walking, right, with Heidegger, right? There's
Right. That's right. That's right.
it's not like absorbing viewpoints or having philosophical positions or arguing for this, that, or the other thing, right? Like people, you can draw that out, but in some sense, that's not what Heidegger is up to, I sense. It's more like you are
Yes,
literally going on a walk, right? And the matter never, because in some sense, I always got the sense that, you know, to to try to to try to speak being, right? To really speak being, in some sense, is to it's almost like saying how can we talk about context without making it a content, right? That
right.
that sense of how can we get closer and more intimate with the withdrawing mystery that shines forth without raping it of its mystery, right?
Exactly.
This
Right.
that sense, and what I'm hearing is that that really translates into the very place from which you seek in your students with your students to come from, right? To come from.
No, yes, yes, and I think you're exactly right about Heidegger, and um, that's why I think a certain kind of person is attracted to Heidegger's thinking. I mean, and um, it's a mistake to try to make Heidegger a different kind of thinker. So, I mean, if you're attracted to Heidegger's thinking, I think it's for the reasons that you laid out. You know, it is taking this walk. It is trying to um, always find new language to say what this relationship with being is, and and for me, when I'm talking about Heidegger, I'm not trying to imitate Heidegger.
Yeah.
It's in the same way that I say in this book. I'm inviting people to come along with me on this walk
Yeah.
and see what
Yeah.
you think. And I think Heidegger is doing the same thing. Uh, Come with me. Here's how I am going to, uh, circumambulate this core issue that I have, and here's how I'm going to talk about it, and here's the language I'm going to use. And if it opens up something for you, then okay, wonderful. And now you speak from your place, from your space.
Yeah.
And so I'm I'm Heidegger is the thinker who invited me to enter into that space. Jung did the same thing.
Mm.
Bill Richardson did in his way. But I'm not a scribe. I'm not simply a Heidegger scholar there to, document what the man said.
Yeah.
I am there to uh, speak from that space, that place where Heidegger helped me uh, confirm for myself.
Totally. Totally. And always underway.
Underway. Yes, we are underway.
Yeah.
And that's that emphasis on unfolding that we started with today, right? Because Heidegger, is always emphasizing it's an unfolding. We're an unfolding. Existence is an unfolding. To temporal unfolding, temporal spatial unfolding. And there's a deep respect for that. And if he's critical of past philosophical thinking, it's for that reason that somehow thinking came or philosophical thinking came to overlook that, or
Mm.
or move too quickly to the timeless or to the changeless, to the eternal. Move too quickly. I think that was Heidegger's problem with
Yeah,
that.
totally. Yeah. Move too quickly. Very,
Yeah.
very interesting. And it's funny, just and it's funny, given that the case, right? That what he wasn't doing was like arguing for positions or something, right? Like,
Right. Right.
yeah,
Right.
he's thinking it's it's all the things that it opened up, right? Like I always think about this, like, you know, for example, Sartre, right? Misunderstood Heidegger, and his very misunderstanding became a whole movement, right? Called existentialism, right? In the misunderstanding of Heidegger, right? Created a whole movement in itself, right? I think some of the same things are, that you could say certain things in certain strands of postmodernism, right? Like there wouldn't be a Derrida without Heidegger. There wouldn't be like so many different things for cog science, which is really deeply indebted to Heidegger. All the things that he opened up through this through this walking is such a mystery to me, right? It's so striking.
He was an original and seminal thinker, and you're right. It generated all sorts of different directions for thinking in the 20th century and into the 21st century. And I suppose that's why so many people are still interested in thinking about Heidegger.
Yeah.
But as we said earlier, um, I think that for myself at least, right, that there's a certain uh, I enjoy mining that one issue that I think spoke most deeply to me, you
Yes.
know.
Yes.
And so I, I and for that reason, I just don't have the same resonance with all the other issues that could be talked about coming out of Heidegger. There are so many, but they don't speak to my core, and therefore I want to continue to speak
Yeah.
from that core because I think that's where the power lies. That's where in the best sense of that word, not in the way it's used today, but that's where the energy, the uh, that that sense of deep and powerful connection
Mm.
uh, exists.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I can really I can feel the congruence in you when you say that.
Yeah.
The whole thing, I feel like I've been in getting deeper and deeper in relationship with you through the whole conversation. And it comes through in your writing very, very well and clearly.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want
Yes.
to ask is, can I ask you about I got curious about, you said there was a point with Richard where like he's like, okay, that's a direction, go do it. What was the point? Can you say something about the point of difference, or what was where did you fork off from what he was?
Well, yeah. Well, I could say something about that. I think uh, Bill Richardson became deeply involved with the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. And I don't, have you read any Jacques Lacan? He was enormously
I
popular.
mostly listen to people that
Uh,
have read a lot of Jack.
yes, yes, yes. He got deeply engaged in that, and he himself went to become a practicing psychoanalyst.
Oh, he did. But
Yeah, he did. He did. And um, and I studied Freud and Lacan with him, but I remained um, far more compelled by Jung
yeah, yeah,
and Jung's work.
yeah,
And it was at that point where, because for a few years I had put my Jungian studies aside, and I immersed myself um, following his lead in Freud's writings and Lacan's writings, but it I didn't it didn't resonate with me.
yeah,
And I thought that Heidegger was better illuminated by Jung and Jung by Heidegger.
yeah.
And I think it was at that point, where Bill was so immersed still in Freud and Lacan that, you know, I I had to make a decision. I
Yeah.
said, no, I need to continue to pursue Jung. And so what I ended up doing really was writing my dissertation under his supervision on a Heideggerian reading of Jung.
Oh, wow.
So,
Oh, wow. That's
yeah, 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 yes. Now, he was not altogether happy with that,
yeah,
because he
yeah.
would have preferred something on Freud and Lacan. But it was at that point where he said, "You have to do what you have to." He didn't, you
Totally.
know, he wasn't happy, maybe,
Yeah.
but he gave me the freedom. He said, "This is your path now." And then from then on, I continued to develop those ways of thinking and to look at Heidegger in ways that Bill had not looked at Heidegger. And we remained good friends. We would present together later on, as I became a more mature scholar. We presented together. And
Mm.
uh, so we, till the day he died, we had a very amicable and very good relationship, which
Yeah.
I'm thankful for, because I could see. I mean, thinking back as a young scholar, and I said to him, "No, I'm going to do Heidegger and Jung." That could have spelled trouble, if the mentor turns into the bully, or into the one who feels betrayed. But that didn't happen.
That didn't happen. Yeah. That says
Didn't
a lot.
happen.
That speaks a lot.
It does. It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. Yeah, to be able to be detached enough from your own position, right? To encourage a blossoming position of another, right? In the face of like at one level unresolvable differences, right? Like to come from another level, like speaks to a relationality that is, I'm imagining, is, from what I understand, is rare and rare, especially in academic settings and university settings. So that's
It's true. I think it is rare, and I know that more today than I did then. Um, but it was, yes, it was an important moment in my life, because and again, I'm a young person, young scholar, and so I didn't have quite the insight or the strength that I would have years later. But I just knew somehow that
yeah,
it was Jung. It was Jung that
yeah,
uh, was going to um, open up more of Heidegger, and Heidegger that would open up more of Jung, and
yeah,
that was the path that I wanted to take.
Yeah, I really appreciate this, and it's actually striking that you don't hear much about Jung and Heidegger together, right? Like,
It's very true. It's true. But one of the reasons I think was that Freud and Lacan offered a very tragic view of existence, a fractured, broken, dissociated view of existence. And that was very much in sync with the zeitgeist of the time, and still to some extent today, where the emphasis is on the brokenness of our factical lives. And uh, so it was no surprise to me that, Freud and Lacan was very, very well received by the continental philosophers of the time, the postmodernists of the time,
yeah,
and that Jung would be like Heidegger, or the later Heidegger in particular, ignored or dismissed in some way as offering an unrealistic view of teleology and
yeah,
wholeness and completeness of unfolding in the ways that we've been talking about. So it came as no surprise to me. I'm just very thankful that given the academic environment at the time and into the present day, that I had an opportunity at least to
yeah,
pursue my my interests and write and publish and teach and lecture. I consider it a great blessing that I've been able to do that.
yeah. Such a blessing, such a blessing. It's interesting because that, is my friend John Vervaeke talks about this. Sounds like this, and I have a similar, like I don't quite know what to make, and I've just chalked it up to I just haven't read Lacan enough to really understand because in a lot of the conversations, on, I mean, what actually one of the beautiful things about the web is that you can actually, like, you can talk to people, right? And you can find each other to have dialogues with at a highly curated level, right? And it's really fascinating to watch how the internet, in some senses, is awakening a kind of philosophical dialogue, right? That you can then share with other people to participate and seeing what's coming about of that. But I hear a lot of Lacanian kinds of things, and I'm always like, what is like what there? Because I think what I hear in some of it is, and with Freud, right? This the hermeneutics of suspicion, right? This but as John really points out, is like the thing about it is that if you just like stay with the hermeneutics of suspicion, right? If you look at a suspicious gaze with anything, you're going to find things worthy of suspicion, right? Like you'll always find it, right? And
That's right. That's
but
right.
but he says, but the very act of suspicion presupposes a hermeneutics of beauty, right? You couldn't have that hermeneutics of suspicion if it wasn't already always in a relationship with something, as John would say, the hermeneutics of beauty, right? And there is, I've noticed, like a kind of insulating quality that evokes in that kind of suspiciousness about our psyches and about that. I mean, discloses a lot of things, but you can't. It, it's that sense of that it's already though presupposing that there's something that isn't suspicious, right? What is that, right? That part, right? And bringing that around.
Right. And lots of people are not interested in knowing what that other part is.
Yeah,
See, that was my experience. in the 80s, 90s into the 21st century is that academics, especially many postmodernists, really were almost exclusively focused only on the broken and on the fracture and on the dissociation but that's not the complete picture in my view. It's real, but it's not the complete picture.
Totally.
And to say otherwise, though, you see the problem is to say otherwise meant that you were returning to some kind of I don't know, pre-modern idealism,
right?
Yeah,
in itself,
right. Yeah, and that's why Heidegger studies became fractured too, because there were some who insisted on only reading certain parts of the early Heidegger, where there's an emphasis on the more dark and difficult aspects of our existence.
Yeah. Really interesting. So I'm also just kind of appreciating that sense of what, it does take something to stand in this place of, right, having an openness to the mystery, right? It takes something in this time, right? And I would imagine academically, like there's a whole world that I really don't have any idea about, but I sense and I hear about, right? That with that open.
I had no idea. I had no idea how it was going to turn out.
Yeah.
I had no idea, because it certainly was not in sync with the currents of continental thinking at the time, but it unfolded very well.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
I really appreciate your work, my friend. This has been I've just really loved this, as I call it, like it felt like we got into some genuine dialogos.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it very much. And I thank you for your interest and also your own sensibility. I feel that, we're speaking from that same space.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much, my friend. And I'd love to let's stay in contact. I'd love to have maybe some conversations focusing on one of your books and maybe reading a bit from it and diving deep if you're open to that. We can.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Well, good. Let's keep in touch. Thank you.